comment. Oh, and I should call the roll before I go through this whole agenda. So I am here, Ms. Shelp is here, Mr. Saddlefield is here, Ms. Fry is not, Mr. Bailey is excused, Mr. Mills excused. All right, so reports of directors. Do you all have anything?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
I have something, but we'll cover it later. Reports of committees. Property management, we didn't meet last time, I believe, did we? You look like you had something to say.
No. I did that report to the directors and officers for Laura, if you want to go over the treasurer's report.
Oh, okay, sure. Thank
The
you.
account balances, United Bank has an account balance of $103,963.01. And the community checking account is $9,368.36 for a total ending balance of $113,331.37.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I don't think the other committees have met either because of our transition period, right? Here's Laura. Hi. No. All right, report of staff. Do we have a report from you, Jamie?
Other than items that have been placed on the agenda, I have nothing further to report today.
Okay, thanks. Ricky?
Same, other than the chair and I have talked, and we're going to be having a meeting about putting a little more concise agenda and meeting packet together and providing maybe some staff reports on the items of business that you guys are going to be asked to consider to provide more guidance up front, so you're not looking through a big packet and not sure what to expect from us. So we will work on that in the coming weeks.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Sure.
Ryan, do you have any report? Okay. So we need a motion to approve minutes from the July meeting.
So, second.
All right, thank you. And on to unfinished business. Demolition of properties. It looks like we had 3 that you put out to bid already, right?
Yeah, so the staff can provide the update that the contract's been executed. We're working on the notice to proceed with the state and getting them that information, and work should start next month.
Next month,
Correct.
September,
September.
which
Sorry,
is closer than it seems.
That's next.
Okay.
That's Monday.
You're right, okay, cool. And did you have a question about that? Which ones and?
No, they're further on the list here for the donation of properties, so.
Okay.
I'm sorry, just one correction to the minutes.
Okay.
I was in attendance.
You were?
I was.
You were, all right.
We will make that correction. My apologies.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't ask for discussion. My Robert's rules are slipping. All right. Donation of properties. I think we were just sort of monitoring where these stood, and do you have an update for us on that, or should I try to remember?
I can forward by email after the meeting.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay. Nothing really big has happened since last meeting, I take it. So the pending property transactions, we probably need to just discuss in executive session, but I will update you all on that when we get there. Anything on agency communication plans?
No update from what Galen presented at the last meeting.
Okay. All right, on to new business. So last month, we talked about revising the ordinance of the agency, and Jamie and Ryan took a look and we made some changes, and so will one of you want to discuss?
Sure, happy. I can kind of summarize some of the items that are before you all for consideration, and then Ryan, if you anything else you want to hop in on. So we had some discussion as a group before and tried to evaluate ways forward that we can make the committee as productive as possible. And so what we've put together for consideration is one of the things we really wrestled with and would suggest as an alternative to what was discussed before is considering some of the additional members that the committee would like to see as more of an ex officio type of role. So what we have drafted, which of course would be subject to the board's approval, as then it would go to the commission as a suggestion, would be potentially reducing the number of board members from 9 to 5 to try to get to a situation where reaching quorum and things of that nature are a little bit more manageable. So trying to look at that factor, it was a request of the board that the city manager be added to the board. So we are suggesting that we move forward in that direction. And then we would have ex officio members of somebody related to the Fairmont Morgantown Housing Authority, which I have had initial conversations with them. They seem open to having a continued involvement. Somebody from the MCDA, they also I've had initial conversations and they seem open to being involved as well. City attorney, somebody from the Development Services Department or their designee. And we always, when we write policy, like to write it at the highest level and say, or it can be designated. So we certainly recognize that we want representation for this board. From what we hear is both involvement for those who can kind of speak and advise on behalf of the code enforcement side, as well as from the planning side. So we've had that discussion at staff, is making sure that there is involvement, no matter what that designation looks like, that both sides of that department's house can be addressed. But we have it written as the Development Services Director or designee. And then as you take a look going down, we tried to capture some of the desires of areas of experience as we were appointing those 4 members that would be appointed by council based on some of the feedback that we heard from the board. Another thing that was discussed previously or conceptually that we would like to have some discussion of is, should there be any type of term limits? And I believe that there was some feedback of whether or not that should be in there. So just running through, the term limits would apply to the appointed positions, those who are serving as ex officio roles because of their either the city manager or the staff would be as long as they are in those roles that would continue to serve. So that is a summary of what we've put together for the board to consider. If that aligns with your all's vision of what you'd like to see, we can have some further discussion and then move that on to a future city council meeting. Brian, anything else?
Great description. A couple of notes on the mechanics. There's the requested term limits, they show up as terms of 2 years with no more than 2 consecutive terms, so a maximum of 4 years on the board, and then you have to sit out a term at least. Also, because this is reorganizing the appointed membership, what this ordinance draft does is have an effective date January 31st, 2026, and appoints a whole new board as of that date, so that that's how we deal with the overlapping terms and a switch from the current number of members to a new board with the passages in this draft 4 appointed members plus the city manager. So that doesn't mean, city council can certainly reappoint the people who are serving here, but they would have to reappoint everybody, and then we set up those initial terms with the rotation so that you would all expire.
And one point of conversation that we should probably have is the clarification of previous served terms. Does that count when we're establishing these new term limits? Or are we creating this new ordinance with this new structure and these regulations are going forward prospectively?
Yeah, a really good point. And my understanding is that it would not, that limitation on consecutive terms would only operate from the effective date of this ordinance forward, so everybody could serve 2 new terms to start before going on.
Just ask your question.
Are we still considering a council person?
I apologize, that should be it is in the ex officio list of roles. I apologize, it is in there, but I failed to mention it.
Okay, discussion.
Do most of the other committees or agencies that are similar, so the Housing Authority and those sorts of agencies that operate on behalf of the city with that similar kind of structure, Do they also have term limits as well? Is that why we're instituting that at this time?
I don't know of any city boards and commissions offhand that do have terms. The Fairmont, the Housing Authority is a bit of a different animal. It is a combined cooperative governmental agency established by Fairmont and Morgantown, and
True.
that's different.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't think they have term limits. I don't know offhand of any other Morgantown boards and commissions that do.
We just talked about that last time because we feel like it might just benefit everybody to have rotation.
And certainly not something that we necessarily from a city stance are imposing, but because it was discussed, wanted to make sure that we're capturing that as an option.
One other thing that I kind of wonder about is, do we want to say the housing authority or a similarly situated organization in the ordinance?
We can.
I don't know,
Whatever housing, something.
just in case. I don't know if that matters, but
So this is an ex officio position, so it kind of needs to devolve upon somebody automatically, and that person could then designate someone. If you want it to be somebody appointed from a public housing agency or something like that, you could say that, for instance, city council would appoint a non-voting member from a public housing agency, or something else, but we couldn't unless we say the director of the housing authority will serve ex officio, covers over office, we can't say it like.
or some other organization.
Somebody, or some other
Got it.
organization.
Okay,
We don't need
all right.
the office, that's all.
Well, we'll
But
just
we
leave it
certainly
with
can
that.
accomplish that.
I don't know. It occurred to me that we just kind of threw out these organizations and we didn't really have a corresponding organization for conservation or green space, and I don't know. I don't know if there really is any other contender at this point anyway. So maybe it's fine like it is, but. So it looks like the things we need to decide. Are we okay with the members that we've talked about being ex officio? Anyone object to that concept? So that would be the city attorney, the development services director, or their designee, which we are probably thinking might be a code person, council member, housing person, economic development person. So that'd be 5 people ex officio.
And city attorney?
Sorry, city attorney, 6.
So, ex officio have a vote, right?
No.
Do not. They're described as non-voting.
So 6 non-voting members and 5 voting members.
5 voting members and 5 non-voting members.
Is it 5? I thought. Development services, housing authority, development, or
5 not voting.
development, whatever we call that. Ryan.
It's 6.
Council, 6. Yeah. Does that matter, Jamie?
Yeah?
2.
Yes.
3.
We're going to lose one.
I got 5 spots.
Because it's, yeah.
I've got 5 non-voting members.
Would you get 9 total?
Give me 10.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
5 and then.
Yes, she would be.
I count 5 non-voting.
They may be thinking of the building official, which they had talked about.
Yeah, so they proposed that, and then I said, well, what about
Which would be the
7?
development services.
I don't know.
Or designated.
I think we need to discuss. I think we should ask.
Right, in this.
I think that's another alternative. What did you guys think about 5 versus 7? Did you have a reason for moving down to 5?
I think that can be at the appetite of the board. I would say I'm always mindful of the size of boards and if they get too big or unwieldy, or can you meet quorum and things like that in areas that can cause struggles when it comes to larger memberships. But it's not necessarily an area that I'm super impassioned about. I just want to make sure that whatever the group looks like, we have regular engagement and involvement. We can fill the roles. I know sometimes when we get vacant positions, it can be challenging on large boards. And so as a general stance, I'm usually looking to try to contract boards, just to make sure that they are something that we can fill and keep active and engaged. One of the other ways I'll always like to encourage is boards can create subcommittees if there's different areas that they want involvement that can be beyond those who are engaged in the board. But if the board would like to propose 7 versus 5, that doesn't cause me too much heartburn. I just want to make sure that we can fill those roles and keep people attending.
Okay.
More of a philosophical conversation. But if, take the Mon County Development Authority person, if they're non-voting, with all due respect to how we're thinking about this, is you say, well, you come to the meeting, but you aren't going to vote. I just think you'd have trouble getting people to show up and serve. I mean, I think they have a lot of meetings, all these folks and that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that maybe we should make them voting. It just seems to me we want their expertise and that sort of thing, but as we explain it, we want you to be a member of this, but you aren't a full member. I mean, I just think philosophically, I think maybe it's just talking about that.
And I think maybe if there's a desire to go from 5 to 7, maybe you take the 2 agency members and put them on the board as voting members if that is the concern, as opposed to keeping the ex officio and going to 7 on top of that.
Partly, I was concerned because it's like we have 3 main focus areas: development, housing, and green space conservation, and we don't have a conservation organization. And so one solution to that was to move them over to ex officio. And I think you're right. I think that it will not be guaranteed that they come. But I also feel like I can see it both ways. Like, I do want that expertise. I think it would be valuable to coordinate better, but at the same time, this is a city organization, and we're an instrument of the city.
Absolutely.
And we don't necessarily need the development of the county to be hand in hand with everything we do here, so.
And I guess another philosophical thing is part of, I'm your non-resident member. And part of why I didn't think I should chair any longer was we're making changes to a neighborhood. And I don't think it's fair for me to chair this body and not be subject to the same regulations that the city residents are. Are we at the place that maybe non-city residents should not be, or not appropriate for this body? And again, I'm not arguing one way or another, I'm just saying philosophically.
Brian or Mayor, do you, either of you have background on, as this agency was developed, why that was considered or included as part of the makeup and requirement? Okay.
Sorry, which,
Having a non-city resident on the board.
Like, there are rules that some people have to be city residents and some people can be outside city limits.
I do not. I don't remember council discussion on that.
As a point of information, I am also not a city resident.
Neither is she.
So,
So I would, my understanding may be that, and I'm not sure that Brent is either. So it may be that in order to get the expertise of very specific niche areas, to fill the body, that council may need to look outside of city limits.
And that does make, that is very likely makes sense.
So put that back in your pocket.
But maybe if we're touching the language, we need to, if we're not
And it's
doing
only
it, we
like
should
5
consider how
houses,
that
but-
language reads.
I think that might be from the enabling statute. Let me go ahead and check.
Okay.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, where we say a majority of the members shall be residents. If that's not the case, we should revisit.
Jessica and Michael?
I think so. All right, what do you guys think? 5, 7?
I like the idea of 7, because then you only have 4 members, and it's hard to get people here. And if you only have 3 people deciding on something,
I think we have a wide range of expertise that we do want on this body. I mean, we were talking about so many different types of niche areas that we want involved, and really want involved on a really regular basis. At the last meeting, we talked about realtor, we talked about conservation. I think that conservation is sometimes different than recreation. So thinking about that as well. We have city versus county. If we had an occasion where we had all of the expertise coming from outside of city limits, then, we would want to make sure that the city was represented with, I'm in favor of 7.
Okay. Hi. So we're debating the ordinance and we presented this slightly different.
Sorry, what?
So we're debating the ordinance to change the makeup of the board, and they proposed an alternative. They proposed 5 total voting seats, city manager plus 4, so Laura and Adelheid are saying they prefer 7. That's where we are.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you a city resident?
I can't hear you.
Are you a city resident?
Yes,
Oh! We were just discussing.
I knew it would count for something.
I too am a city resident. Just throwing that out.
All right, so you have a thought.
Yeah, I think 4 appointed by council is a little bit small.
Okay.
And I also think just in practical terms, I know that we always have absences, and if you're down to 4 and one of those 4 is away, or 2 of the 4, you're going to have more trouble getting a quorum.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that question and to address that quickly, the requirements that there be 1 member who's a resident, the other 3 subsections there, those are from the enabling legislation. It does not contain a requirement that a majority be members of the city. But for voting purposes, the actions of the agency are taken by a majority of the members present and voting, so you don't necessarily have to worry about a majority of the appointed members being present in order to take action, which is not to say that you have to go with 4 members, but just in case that's a concern.
We're just looking at item C3. We might have to look at that language.
All right, Dave, how do you feel about 7 versus 5?
Is it? Okay.
That seems to be a consensus for 7.
Okay.
Anything else that you want to talk about with the proposed change?
What's your question?
Of the proposal that she presented, so the housing person, the development person, they would all be ex officio.
Right.
Do you have anything else that you object to or want to mention before we?
No, I thought those make sense.
Okay.
The other item of significance that is outlined here is related to term limits in it. So there was a little bit of discussion before you came in on that item. So I
Thank
think
you,
that would
yes.
be an item to make sure.
2-year term limits and a limit of 2 consecutive.
No more than 2 consecutive.
Right. So,
can we request the council person as a group, or is that just appointed outside of our jurisdiction?
The council would decide who would go on that, similar to the way they do all of their other agencies that they send people to participate in.
anything else? All right, did we like your proposal except for 7 instead of 5?
So you're asking about whether a majority of members should be required to be residents of the city?
It just,
That's currently written.
It's optional, it's a requirement in the current ordinance, but it's not required by state law. Do you have particular feelings about that?
I would say we could get rid of that because I think Laura had a good point. If we're trying to get substantive expertise, we're probably going to need to cast a wider net, I would think.
And would you make a difference there between voting members and non-voting members?
I just think
If you
the-
wanted to or not?
No.
Just across the board?
Yeah.
I'm not sure
Anybody disagree?
for,
Having a requirement of city inhabitants?
oh. I don't
I
know.
think it puts council in a bad place if we had a majority of non-residents on. I'm just talking things that are politically. I think that if the city's expending money and that sort of thing, I think council and the managers leaving themselves open to say, well, the majority of the people that voted, if we ever had a 4-3 vote, the majority of those people voted are non-residents of the city. I think it would be politically hard for council. That's just my opinion.
Okay, I mean, I do think it's generally better policy to have people living where they're making goals.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think maybe we'll just look at that to make sure when all the reappointments occur, that we're doing what we say what we do.
Sounds good.
Just in terms of the structure, I didn't know where C, D, and E were here. When this said, on page 20 of our packet, following qualifications in subsections C, D, or E,
They seem to be missing.
it seemed a little jumbled.
It might just be your auto numbering on the revisions or something, but
C, D, and E weren't qualifications.
What is it?
yeah, under the qualifications section is where he's looking. At least 3 members shall have the qualifications. And then-
Oh,
Because we crossed
there
the
previously
E.
was a
Yeah.
paragraph E, we correct that, it's removed.
Okay.
You probably, we probably just remove that sentence with the way it's restricted, because C1 says that each member shall have experience in one of the following areas. What that sentence did, or does, was spread that experience out, so you don't have everybody on the board being experienced in real estate transactions or financing.
Okay. I think he's just saying that the formatting might need to have a look, that's all. Right? Yeah. I'm sure you'll catch this when you, on our version, the numbers are not matching up. Yeah, maybe not. Anyway, you'll catch that when you draft it.
I mean, no, the format is fine in the draft that I prepared, but that term actually does need to be addressed if we're using subdivision.
E is not a qualification about board membership.
The development or management of programs. That's one to be stricken.
I don't know, he might have to come look at it with us, because if yours doesn't look like
I mean, I
ours.
can just pull up the packet.
Yeah. Well, no, there's 6 total people left, so 3.
Not a good format for that, that's not a format. I will take care of it in the ordinance.
Okay, so anybody object to having term limits? All right, so I think we're all good on the ordinance. All right, next item of new business. The potential use of the properties that were recently transferred by the city to the land use agency. Ricky was going to present something on that.
Yes. So at the last board meeting, Caitlin presented, and I think started to go over a potential list of all the properties that were transferred to the agency. And there was some discussion about whether the proposed use at the time was still relevant. And so staff was asked to go back and look at that, and we have. What we're preparing in your packet is what the original workshop that we did several times with members of council and other stakeholder groups and their proposal We crossed that with what staff had looked at it again and made a determination upon going out to the site and finding some more information. And all the items pretty much lined up with what staff and the steering committee agreed with 2 or 3 years ago, except for the items highlighted in yellow. There was more of a question that we wanted to get from the board, whether, hold for instance, the property at Pennsylvania Avenue, do we hold it for use to be determined? We are staff recommending either holding it for green space or for redevelopment purposes. So what staff would like guidance on is a determination of whether is there concurrence with the proposed use. And that way, if there is, then we, as we develop these side lot yard programs and go ahead and start marketing these properties, we know which direction to take. For instance, when we put these properties on our inventory on the agency's website, we should probably tell folks what is available and what is not available.
Yeah.
So that's why we want that guidance.
So do you want us to just do this in property management and then come back to the board with a recommendation? Or are you asking us to look at each of these right now and tell you yes or no?
Staff's ready to do that now, but if we'd rather do it in committee, we can do that as well. Because nothing has changed except for the 5 items in yellow that were identified in yellow. The recommendation was same 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. You guys want to run through them?
Or we can take it to the committee, that's fine as well.
No.
Whatever you want, whatever you want. We can,
We can do it in committee. It might be to have some, where we can actually go through all of the slides, look at the properties again one more time, and then make a recommendation from committee back to the board.
I think that makes more sense to me, unless anyone objects, wants to go through these again. Okay.
Okay, excellent.
Was there anything else that you wanted us to look at on this part, though?
No, that gives us guidance though, so we'll take that at the next property management committee meeting.
So one thing I would like for you guys to also propose, if you could, is, how we're going to price these. And I had a conversation with the assessor, and he told me that once a property is transferred to a tax-exempt entity, they use a commercial valuing system. So anything owned by the city is automatically taxed at a higher, or assessed at a higher rate than private property. And this is why when we had 2 lots side by side in Greenmont, and one private property says, I want that value because the city lot right next to me is at this much, they're not apples to apples. So I just wanted you to know that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
so
Thank you,
interesting.
yeah.
So these assessed, or these total appraisal values on here are going to be way higher than what the market value would be. And
So
you're
we
going to
may-
sell some of these lots.
Yeah, we may not want to use that like point blank. We might need to ask him more questions.
Sure. Follow up on that.
Just looking at some of these parcels or the photographs of them, I was surprised at the number that are triangles that are at a point where 2 roads come together. And it just, I don't know, from a planning perspective, what you recommend, but it would seem to me that often those are places where you probably don't want to obstruct visibility of roads that are coming together. You want to keep them open or undeveloped or side lots or whatever. But it seemed to me that if these are going to be sold so they can be built upon, I'm not sure that we're doing a really great service for neighborhoods and vehicular traffic and sightlines and all of those safety issues.
Thank you, that's a great point. A majority of the lots are not buildable.
Right.
And the ones that are at maybe some of those at the particular intersection,
They're too small.
Staff is recommending to hold for green space.
Okay.
Or if you would sell it, that you could put restrictions on it, that it couldn't be developed with,
Yeah.
Deed restricted when we transfer it.
and you'd still be subject to the city zoning code, which would make it even more difficult to build anything that would obstruct the line of sight or the issues that you raised.
Okay, all right. Anything else on that? All right, next is the development of the side lot program.
Yes, I know Caitlin, I think, had a discussion a little bit at the board last time, and we're trying to flush that out and wanted to get the board's considerations on a few things, and I think you mentioned it before. On the acquisition and disposition of property, looking at a potential process, we consulted with a couple of land banks in Pennsylvania that have a lot of experience in this already, even more so than our local land banks in the state of West Virginia. But one of the suggestions that we talked or learned about was, when a property comes into the agency, is there an opportunity to first put it on the market to sell it? and then have some time limit in which it can be on the market, and then take it into a side lot program, which inevitably means that the agency is going to get less than what it would necessarily want in an initial asking price if it was just on the market. Some communities and some land banks do that, some of them don't. Some of them take them and put the properties right into whatever program they want, and then they go through that process.
Why would you say that we would get less if it was on the market?
Because people may not bid on it, and then after a certain period of time, if you do a side yard lot program, typically you're going probably to get less than what the market value or what the agency.
Oh, okay,
wanted for it.
I misunderstood you. All right, that makes
So,
sense. Yeah.
So that's one consideration. Also, what you brought up is how do we determine the value? And some of the agencies that we talked to, they all have appraisals, and they have it for different reasons. But there was an appraisal that they'd done on the property, and that's what they did.
Okay.
In terms of the side lot program itself, some things to consider is whether we do an application process with like a minimum threshold that you have to apply for, or we do a sealed bid process, or both. The Lackawanna County Land Bank, which is in the Scranton area of Pennsylvania, has a really interesting program where they actually have an application where 2 weeks before a board meeting, you have to make application, staff do a review of the application, and if there's more than one applicant, then they reach back out to those individuals and make them submit sealed bids to keep it more fair. So then those bids are opened at the meeting. Other communities, the one that's in southeastern Allegheny County, the TriCog, they just do an application first come, first served basis. Whoever gets it in, if the board okay with what is submitted and they're comfortable with the bid price, that's what they do. So something to consider too, if we want to try to maximize opportunities, or I know we talked about also, in fairness, allowing people to bid on properties. And so something to consider. And then also the application qualification process, making sure somebody is in good standing with all outstanding fees or liens or things like that to be able to even apply for, to get one of these properties. So any comments? And what we'd like to do is just get some feedback and then bring a full-blown proposal back to committee at our next committee meeting to talk about it and review.
How do these other land banks advertise the land?
Newspaper, sometimes, or website. But in terms of the application process themselves, we talked to both agencies. They don't really do much advertising. And I said, that's interesting. I said, how successful have you been? Lackawanna County has disposed of over 400 properties, and they were established in 2014, 2015. So, again, a bigger geography, right? A bigger city, bigger area, more populated, but still, they're making it work.
So they just plop a sign in the yard and put it on the website and,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it would probably work.
Yeah, I had envisioned it as a threshold, determination, where it was where the threshold was determined by the size of the property that we had. So if a very small property, so, where we're looking really like a garden or a bush. So I think there was one off of Huntington Avenue that was a very steep lot, I used to live there, so it was a very steep lot, and at the top of the lot, there was, a postage-size stamp piece of land where the neighborhood had built a small little park with a bush. And so it felt like it was owned by the neighborhood, that little spot, and then the hillside was taken care of by whoever lived on down the hill. So in that case, there's really nothing to be done with that property, right? So it's not of real value in terms of why would somebody purchase it. So on very small lots like that, we would consider donating it to either the neighborhood association to do something like Wiles Hill or Suncrest or the different neighborhoods where they establish gardens and beautification, maybe a park bench, or give it to the neighbor for upkeep. And essentially at that point, maybe have a deed restriction or a deed requirement that they will do the upkeep. And then for larger properties where it might be of interest to somebody, consider, do we want to have the 2 or 3 or 4 neighbors that are right there do a bidding process? So if it truly is a side yard extension, not buildable, but where the handful of neighbors there might want to compete for it, we could do a sealed bids sort of thing reserved for the neighbors. And then the third place would be if it was a buildable lot. And then if it is a buildable lot, we would have a public notice in the newspaper. We would put out the buildable notice to key stakeholders such as the Housing Authority, Habitat for Humanity, the Builders Association, and invite sealed bids for a buildable lot property that would include the asking price as well as adherence to our purpose. So how are they going to adhere to the purpose of the land bank? So.
And to your point, in Lackawanna County, they actually did have thresholds of a certain value of each type of those lots, whether it was buildable or non-buildable.
Yeah. So that was how I envisioned it. I honestly just assumed we would go with something like that. I didn't think about other options, but I'd assumed that we would have 3 different kind of categories.
And that's different than what we talked to Mr. Butterworth about from Charleston, right? In Charleston, they just have a flat fee. And that's, you make application and you pay and that's it. This is a little more competitive and tries to get to the highest and best use.
I guess, I agree with Laura. I guess on the side, let's stay with the side. When you look at this first one, it's 1,700 square feet. If we can get the neighbor to take it and that they will pay the incremental new property tax and that the city won't have to insure it anymore, I see there's a city benefit there I think that the problem with some of these things that are just sort of orphaned is that you all are still insuring them.
Right.
And if I'm letting kids play baseball on it and somebody gets hurt or something, it becomes an issue there. If we could get these ones that, less than 2,000 square feet, maybe a third or an acre or less, it really is a side yard. If someone would take it, they pay the taxes on it, they insure it. I see there's at least a benefit that they maintain it, they pay some taxes, and they relieve you all of the insurance burden. I think what Laura described as that first level, I think that's exactly what we should do with these small pieces.
Well, we just need you to set that
Yes.
size limit, I think, so we can just parse them into different buckets, right? I think that's one thing.
And you have a situation where you have 2 joining property owners that are both interested that could work together to say, hey, let's subdivide it. And we'll each split whatever the lot size is and consolidate it with our existing properties. That's a possibility too. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the checker boxes should be, is there someone going to maintain it for sure? Someone's going to pay the taxes on it, somebody's going to insure it, so that the city gets out of any responsibilities they would have.
When you look at the potential process up there, I think for me, having a separate category for things that are buildable might be good, right? And maybe we do market some of these things that we're getting donated. Maybe it doesn't always have to be, maybe it could be just putting it back to the market and not necessarily
Absolutely.
housing, or I don't know, it's probably going to be housing because if somebody buys it, but I like the getting an appraisal. I think that would be simpler. We just need a little budget for that, but we probably can pay for that with our rental income. I think the application and sealed bid seems like a good way to go. If you don't get more than one application, then you just go with it, and if you do, then you can do the bids. Do you guys, what do you think about that?
That's fair.
How does a sealed bid differ from an RFP? So in spaces where we've got a buildable lot, I would like to prioritize affordable housing. And if we And honestly, I don't know if we didn't have somebody who wasn't willing to do affordable housing, do we hold it until somebody's willing?
But I think
And
this
is
is
that
different
part
than
of the-
affordable housing. This is the side lot thing. So if
Yeah.
you've got like a situation,
Okay.
we're saying, we'll put it out for application. If we get more than one, then we do seal bids so they can compete against each other.
Okay.
So the 4 adjacents or whatever, you know?
Okay.
And the applicant will need to describe what their intended use is, timelines, do they have the wherewithal to do what they planning to do? That will be part of the documentation process.
Because I think a side lot program is sort of inherently like smaller, right? It's not
It's-
just like a full-on buildable lot. So what you're talking about is a different thing.
Okay. Okay.
We'll separate that out into,
Okay. The
I
categories.
mean, if it's less, if your standard city lot, that you have to have this minimum to build, if it's X% less than that, maybe it is truly a side lot program, that we're trying to get the neighbor to take responsibility and that sort of thing, or the neighborhood association or something like that. If it's clearly not buildable, I mean, it really, that's probably what a side lot really is.
did we answer your questions? Do you have any?
Yes, I have some more guidance.
Okay.
So
Anything
We'll
else?
have a draft prepared at our next committee meeting.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, so now I move that we enter into the executive session to talk about potential property acquisition and development.
So moved.
That was second. And for the record, we're not going to be coming back to do anything else after this executive session.